us.
Okay.
And so yes, we need to, I think probably the first thing to do is just catch up and just check. Have you resubmitted your ethics form now?
Yes, yeah, I have already resubmitted. Yeah.
Good. So we're just waiting for an answer to that one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so then we had sort of talked about you going away, and we talked about you looking at some theses. Is that right? To understand how they are,
Yes.
people write them, how they put it all together, basically.
Yeah.
So did you manage to find any that were sort of similar kind of sequential mixed methods?
I look for some physics and also dissertations, of course, regarding the topic of media and also the press. Some physical health or something like that. I look for some dissertation like this topic, and also with the mixed method, of course. And I found 2 of them are very useful, and I try to. I send you a file, the table of content of my
Yes, I've got it. Yes.
of the dissertation. So I think that this table of content is very suitable for my research as well, because I also copy that content from a mixed method research. So first,
Okay.
yes.
So the reason that we asked you to go and look at theses was about understanding what might go into what your thesis might look like, how you might structure it, and how you might order it. But you need to be careful not to be copying anything, okay? Partly because if you copy it, it's not likely to fit exactly to yours. And also because we need to be very, very careful about plagiarism. Okay? So it's good, and let's just have a look then at your table of contents.
Yes.
And see. So I've got it on my screen here. I'm happy just to. Have you got it on your screen as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah.
Okay. So it's good you've got an introduction chapter.
Actually, I only refer the table of content. I'm not actually totally copy the whole thing. I just try to refer it. If you take a look,
just in terms of the chapter, what the chapters are and what the order is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see that, because actually what I'm looking at fits totally with it. So it doesn't really look like you've copied it, but I see what you mean. So you've looked and you've thought, well, you do an introduction, and then you do a literature review, and then you've got your study design, and then you've got your results, etc., etc.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just have a wee look at this, because having a really detailed kind of chapter contents page, and then kind of putting in the details of what will be in each of the chapters is really helpful. So in the introduction, what do you think you will put into the introduction? What kinds of things do you think it needs to do? What is the job of the introduction?
The introduction actually look like the introductions, of course, to explain my research a little bit, the whole things, the research questions, also mentioned in the introduction, and the motivations of doing these whole things. And actually, it is kind of look like the introduction I used in my research proposal as well. So you're kind of a background, of my whole research, Yeah.
So it provides some background. So often I think it's really useful, Oscar, to think about what is the job of each of the chapters within your thesis, because that really helps you think about what goes into each chapter. So you're right, the job of the introduction chapter is to give the reader some background about why is this research important? So it's the justifications. Why should they read any further than the first page? Why is it important that this research was done? And then as you know, it's almost like as part of that, certainly, definitely, you know, sort of related to that is the motivations for the research. So you'll have, you know, you'll have probably some personal motivations for doing this research, but you probably also have motivations that come from, you know, your observations of young gay men's experiences in Macau in terms of their self-identity and coming out and things like that might also be motivations for doing this, and their stress levels. So the motivations can come from different places, can't they?
Yes. But I certainly don't mention my personal motivation, right? I mentioned some like objective motivation. I mean, if I say that, well, because I'm interested in that particular topic, I won't mention this sentence in my dissertation, right? It's my personal motivation, right? That is, it's not a social motivation. It's not a motivation for the society.
You know, so it is absolutely crazy to think that anybody does research only because of objective motivations, okay? Because if you look at it, and if you think about the philosophy of why we attend to some things in society and not to other things. So why do I give my attention, for instance, to issues around about injustice, or to stories that come in the news about people experiencing sort of hardship and difficulties, or equally, why do I give my attention to stories about horses and equestrian events and things like that, rather than stories about business or stories about right-wing politics? And it's not that any one of these stories is any more important in the world if you look objectively, but that my interests in the world and my beliefs about what is valuable, so my values, orientate me towards engaging with these kind of stories and not those kind of stories. And equally then, they engage me with thinking about the problems that are there for particular communities. So I have an interest in mental health, I have an interest in injustice, I have a huge interest in power and how that creates injustice. So when I look in the mental health field, and and there are lots of issues to be explored, I'm drawn towards problems that engage with my interests around about service users' experiences and power and institutions. And we all engage with our world on the basis of our interests and our beliefs and our values, and some of them are shared across cultural groups, but some of them are much more individual. And so there is some, I mean, I'm not just, this is something that people write about. So Sandra Harding, who is a feminist writer, actually wrote a book called Is Science Multicultural? And it totally questions this idea of objectivity, that scientists investigate problems because they are somehow objectively the most valuable. And she absolutely identifies that what is funded is driven by interests of individuals and governments, etc., etc. So everything is motivated by personal agenda and how personal agendas fit together to create the funding priorities. And so equally, as scientists, as researchers, we are also influenced to look in particular areas or in a particular way at problems because of who we are and our experiences in the world and what we think is valuable. So for me, I absolutely think that our personal motivations, are undeniable, really. And what you do find in a lot of very positivist scientific work is this idea that somehow the researcher leaves themselves and their values and everything else somewhere out there, and they come in as this blank board that engages that, and that's not true, and we know it's not true.
Okay.
Because it's impossible. So yes, you can talk about your personal motivations. Now, it also depends if you know, that doesn't mean going into some great reflective piece about your experience in relation to any of this. It can if you want to, but equally, you can just you can just talk about that, you know, this is an area of interest that's developed, and you know, it led you towards, you know, you were interested in young gay men's experiences. You also were, you know, you've got a background in media, you know, so although you're doing your PhD in a health discipline, you know, you are bringing that background of media and understanding of the potential of media as a way of coping and a way of expressing. And so you're bringing that in as well. So all of these things are important, I think, for the reader to understand in the introduction, because then they know who's doing the research, yeah, and where it's come from, and they can understand then. So when I know that, so when I know, for instance, about your media background, I can begin to understand why you've chosen those particular research questions, this particular research topic. Okay, so do you see how actually understanding the personal way into it is really important? Because if I don't get any of the personal, it just comes across. Well, you know, I have to believe that really this is one of the biggest issues in the literature and in policy, and I might not really believe that. So there are other things there that you help give it credibility and help justify why this topic and why now and why it's important.
Okay, so it includes personal motivations and also some social or objective motivation as well, right? Includes, okay.
Yeah. So there will be lots of motivations that are there, and it is really important to write them all. And then, of course, you have got the objective stuff. So you've got the literature where you find the gaps, and you've got the policies as well.
Yes, and that's true.
And you might also have the statistics. So you might have statistics that say that actually in Macau, there is a, you know, high incidence of mental health issues.
Over half of LGBT members, they are suffering from stress. Let's say that. Well, I got some data to support my accusation. I mean my you know.
Justification.
Justification.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. So that and all of that can fit into. Is the introduction is usually about 5,000 words. Okay, and so you would put all of that in, and the introduction also will include then a kind of a synopsis or a summary of each of the chapters, so that for the reader there's a map of what they will then read about in each of the chapters as well.
Okay. All in introduction, right? I need to write
in the introduction. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I just wrote down some like personal motivations, objective motivations, some policy, maybe some statistical data, and also the summary of each chapter.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so then you've got your introduction, and it's introduced your reader, and they now know what to expect across the rest of your thesis. So as you say, you're going to then review the literature, and I like this. I like the fact that you're doing definitions of key terms.
Yes.
And then conceptual definitions. Yeah.
Yeah, because some people confuse about sexual orientation and gender identity. They confuse these two terms. So I think maybe it's essential for me to just write down some, you know, some things about these two terms, the definition about these two terms.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. Absolutely. And also this, we talked about it right at the beginning, didn't we? You're sort of really, you're looking at LGB, and yet, you know, everybody just says LGBT as if it's all the same thing.
Yes.
And so So yes, so it's really useful to be explaining that as well.
Mhm.
So your conceptual definitions and the research hypotheses then, that's a very theoretical discussion, am I right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
That is something, yeah. Mhm.
And do you review the empirical literature
Mhm.
in that part as well? Or do
Mhm.
you need to do, where do you do a kind of a review of the current research on,
Mhm.
you know, essentially on the use of media to mitigate stress in LGB communities? So
Mhm.
as a way of kind of situating your work, we would usually do a literature review, a theoretical kind of literature, but then
Mhm.
also a review of the current empirical research that
Mhm.
relates to our topic, so that then we can point to the space that
Mhm.
exists, that our research question and the answer to our research question will fill.
Mhm. Um, so far I divide it to 4 sections, as you can see.
Yeah.
And you mean you mean try to look for something to group this together to like 1, 2, 3, 4 together, or?
I'm just really wondering, because I can't remember, I think you do this already, okay?
Yes.
But for instance, in your discussion of social media and social identity, and obviously you're drawing on different theories,
Yes.
but equally you're drawing on the research literature.
Social identity theory. You mean like yeah, yeah.
But you're also looking at, are you then looking at what research has been done
Yes.
and what it's found
Yes.
in relation to social media and social identity?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I found the latest studies about social media and social identity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the literature comes in there, and I guess it's just checking that there isn't any literature. I mean, I'm assuming there's not any studies on the exact area that you're looking at. It doesn't matter if there are, because you know there's always room for more than one study about anything.
Yes.
But you know, are there studies about using social media to manage minority stress?
You mean the current study?
Yeah, well, you know, if I was
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, what do we know about
Mm-hmm.
young men using social media to manage their minority stress? Could you tell me
Uh-huh.
what the current literature says? Now, you might say, well, there's no literature on that because I've looked and there's nothing that addresses these things together.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might say, yeah, there's been a couple of studies and they found, you know, there was a couple of qualitative studies and they found this, and there was a big survey and it found that. On your actual topic?
Not much. So far, I think I only found one study talking about use of social media and minority stress, but that study is only a quantitative study. It's not a qualitative study, and also that study doesn't mention anything about attributional style, and
Yeah.
so yeah. But so far, I can only found one study about that.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So you need to demonstrate that you've looked, not only do you build up a kind of, you know, this is why you would bring these variables together, but actually to just show that you know, nobody has, there's not really any understanding of minority stress and how young LGB community members use social media to manage their minority stress, and that's all I'm saying. So you've got your literature related to these different areas that you're developing because they underpin your hypotheses, don't they? And then you've got your, but also as well, somewhere you need to talk about what is already known when we bring these things together. So social media, minority stress, and
Attribute, yeah.
communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think probably you need to put in a section on that, because actually what we need, there's nothing, for instance, in this where you're looking at LGBT communities and their experience of minority stress. Well, except for in your definitions, but then you need to look at the research in relation to that.
You mean in the chapter 2? In chapter 2? Definition?
In chapter 2,
okay.
Yes. So it's not, it wouldn't be part of the definitions, but it would be, I think you probably need to think about kind of like, I don't know how you would term it, because you've got a nice neat, but maybe then you need to have a section called C, which is the empirical evidence relating to the minority stress and LGBT community members. And the other aspect is actually about the use of social media to deal with minority stress.
Is it also included in conceptual definitions in that B, as chapter 2B under B section?
It might be that you are including it there. What I don't see anywhere in these titles of, sort of use of social media and social identity, negative attributional styles and minority stress, is the mention of your participant population.
Oh, I see what you mean. But actually, in each sections, I also include some information about LGBT study. In each one, included in each one. Yeah.
Okay, it would have been very strange if you didn't. And I'm thinking about all of the writing you've done in terms of even your. Let me just think about. No, it wasn't here. I'm thinking about even your first year review. So the literature review in that was, quite comprehensive, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so here you've got the theoretical approach, minority stress and LGB orientation. So actually, you've written lots already that will probably it will help then fit into, and you'll probably just develop it further from your what you've already written. And where does your conceptual model with the hypotheses sit then in your thesis?
In the research proposal, I can, let me see if I can send it to you now.
Well, no, I'm just asking you in terms of within the thesis. So again, your conceptual model was really clear. It kind of underpins your design and what you're looking at in your research questions. I'm wondering if it should be kind of the, everything you do in chapter 2 is leading up to you developing this conceptual model, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
your conceptual model needs to go in there.
Yeah. I know what you mean. After B, after chapter 2B, conceptual definition and research hypothesis, and the last part is research questions and hypothesis. After that sections, then there will be a model. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't think, well, maybe we can play about with this, but in your other bit, you did your model first, didn't you? Because it brings together essentially what you're talking about in those first 3 parts of that section B. And then it comes down to the model, doesn't it? And then you had your research questions and hypotheses following that before. It really doesn't matter. We can play about with it at the end, but I think you need to remember you have a conceptual model, and it's a really good one, and it needs to go in there, because essentially it may well be something that you then bring back in, because you will maybe find that it changes with the results. I mean, that's what we would hope, isn't it? That actually your results give you the ability to modify that in line with what you find.
I see. Okay. So maybe just in somewhere in section B, I think somewhere maybe in the front or at the end, I think.
Yeah, I think towards the end of section B, I think definitely.
Okay.
And then you're right, that takes you then into your study design.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
You need to write somewhere about the theoretical and the philosophical perspective, so you know things like queer theory and these other theories that are kind of shaping how you're going to, and how you understand the nature of reality, and how you understand then the construction of knowledge. So we talked about queer theory, and you've done some writing about queer theory, but also you need to think about the kind of what is the epistemological underpinning of mixed methods.
I think I will also put in section B as well.
No. Sorry, what you want to put in section B?
Queer theory, I think will be. No.
It would go in, either we put in a chapter called methodology, where you really address your your ontology, epistemology and methodology, or it just goes in at the beginning of your study design. You would do the bits on ontology, epistemology and methodology. And there you're really telling the reader what you've chosen to do and justifying why you've made those choices. So how they fit with your research questions.
I see. So should be placed before research questions then?
Well, no, your research questions are fine sitting in that end of that literature. You would reiterate them in your study design, but that's fine. But the ontology, Oscar, is about how do I understand reality? So what is real and what is not? And there are different positions in relation to that. And you're doing a mixed methods study, and mixed methods because it does mix methods, basically. So you've got quantitative and qualitative, which traditionally come from quite different ontological positions. So ontology, normally, if you were doing sort of quantitative work, and it would come from a positivist position, which identifies that we have this, there is a reality that exists without us, so it's separate to us, and that basically that what we need to do to find out about that reality is to take the right measures and know the right questions to ask, the measures to use, and we can find out about that reality, and that reality is unchanging, so that if I take the right measure today and in 40 years somebody else takes the right measure, they would still get the same answers, because that reality exists. It's fixed and it's obdurate, so it's there, and it's going to stay there in that state, in that way, forever. And that kind of leads to this idea about a single truth and facts. Okay, so people who come from that, and that's really the pure science paradigm. People who come from that paradigm talk about their findings as if they're facts, and of course that's where hypotheses come from, isn't it? So this idea that actually we need to disprove something, to know that something exists. So that's the positivist end, and that's the quantitative aspect sits in there. And then you've got the qualitative end, of course, where reality is understood as constructed, and social reality doesn't exist. Well, our reality is a social reality, and it doesn't exist except for.
I'm sorry, because of the bell, the school bell.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, now it's okay.
It's very tuneful. And so the idea in qualitative work is generally that actually reality is created by our engagement with the world and with each other, and we know it through our development of symbolic systems like language, which enables us to share our realities and an understanding of our realities. So then reality is also understood as being multiple realities. So my experience of the world or of an event in the world, so say, well, we are having supervision just now. We're both having supervision just now. We're both on Teams just now. But our story about supervision would be slightly different. So if somebody was to come along and say, Oscar, tell me your version of what supervision was just now, and then someone came along and asked me, we would tell a story where it was recognisable that we'd been in the same session, but there would be quite clear differences in how we'd interpreted what was happening, how we'd experienced what was happening, that come from the fact, well, partly because you're the student and I'm the supervisor, so there's a different power relationship, we bring different knowledge base to it, we bring different motivations and abilities and views, etc. to it, which makes our experience different. So that's the basis of qualitative research, is then about actually two people can experience the same event, and because we have a shared language and we share a lot of cultural beliefs and discourses that enable us to have a shared experience, but also our individual experiences will be slightly different because as individuals we bring different things to that experience. And what you're doing, of course, is coming into a middle bit that says, I've got this qualitative and I've got this quantitative, and sitting here in the middle. And I think most mixed methods, and it's worth going back to look at and see, or maybe you know this already, comes from a sort of critical realist perspective. Have you come across critical realism?
Sorry, what?
Critical realism. I'll put it in the.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah, critical realism. Yeah. Yeah, I read some sections in the books before about that. I think it's kind of a mixed method, right? Critical.
Yeah, so there's critical realism is what often people who do mixed methods use as their position in relation to reality, because critical realism was developed really as a way of kind of bringing together these two really different ideas about what reality could be in a way that enables them to sit together and to work together. So the original author roundabout critical realism was a man called Bhaskar.
Okay.
And he wrote in, I think, probably the 1970s, maybe the 1980s. But I think probably, let me just go and just check before I tell you this for sure. I think Creswell. Yes. No. Critical realism. Yes, Michael Creswell. I'm sure it's him, Mark Creswell. No, it's not him either.
Creswell, I think I read a book written by
Creswell writes about research methods and
Clark, I think.
Clark.
Yeah.
Clark and
Creswell
write about mixed methods.
Yes.
Oh, I know why I couldn't find it. I was spelling his name wrong. I had two S's.
Yeah.
John Creswell, that's the one.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, Plano Clark.
Yeah.
So designing and conducting mixed methods research is, I think, their most recent book, isn't it? There's a third edition to it. Oh, don't do that. Have you seen that book, Designing and Conducting Mixed Methods Research, by them? It's a 2017 book.
Yes. I read I found sections and about that, especially the sequential one, the sequential method, that one.
Yeah. And I think, oh, I've got a wee echo there. So the chapter 2 is the really important one, the one about the foundations of mixed methods research, because that starts to give you the historical, not the historical, the philosophical foundations. And so that's where I'm sure they address there the critical realism. So critical realism, to go back to where I started with this, would go in there at the kind of, you would have a discussion about critical realism and how it, what it is, and what the understanding of reality is when you're using a critical realist perspective. And so that would go in at the beginning of your study design chapter. Okay.
Chapter 3. Under chapter 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you need to have a good discussion of critical realism as the underpinning philosophy, basically, for mixed methods. Okay. And then you go on to describe you need to say why you're doing mixed methods as well. So then why are you doing mixed methods? Why is it an appropriate approach to your question?
Yeah. Yes. I think the main reason is because I want to know a comprehensive understanding of the whole topic. It's not only qualitative or quantitative. I want to want both of them, Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's really good. And I suspect you've probably got that in your first. So some of these will be in your first year review, like why are you using mixed methods? And it will be about building on that and being more, just making sure you're very explicit about it. And then you can start to look at your study design. Now, one of the other things that is missing from the study design is context.
Okay.
So you're doing your study in Macau
yes.
and Hong Kong, yeah?
Yes.
So you need to talk about that. You need to tell the reader what the context is and why this context. Why have you chosen Hong Kong as well as Macau? Why are you not just doing some kind of put something out and do it globally?
Yes.
So, again, it's about talking about why, but also actually describing. So they're quite descriptive about what is the context of being somebody who is an LGB community member in Macau, because, and actually some of that, actually, the kind of experience of being an LGB person in Macau and Hong Kong will probably come into your introduction. But then you'll revisit the context in your research design.
Yes. But I also got the participants in the study design. So originally I was going to put that context under participants, that section,
Yeah, so it's better if we keep I always think the research design is much better if we keep the kind of the sections really clearly what they need to be. So I would just do, in all research designs, we need to talk about the research context. So if I'm doing a piece of research, or the setting, it would be more. So I would tend to talk about the setting rather than the context. And I'm going to do it in a hospital. I have to talk about what the setting is. So where is it? How big is it? Why have I chosen that setting? Why have I chosen only one hospital and not 10 hospitals? Why have I chosen, a rural hospital and not an urban hospital? So all of these things, are about the setting and about the choices we're making. So when you're setting out your research design, what you're really wanting to very clearly do is say, these are my choices, and this is why I made these choices.
Okay.
So that there, and then talk about your participants, because when you talk about your participants, that's where you're going to be doing your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You're going to be talking about the size generally, what we know about the size of that LGB community, and then how many participants you want. You will also be talking about the sample sizes for each of your different phases of the research, so the quantitative and the qualitative. So that's where you start to put in all of that stuff.
Okay.
And then procedures. What were you thinking there in terms of procedures? What's
Procedures?
that?
Procedure is how I collect those data. How do I do that?
Right.
And advertisement, of course, those things, and the media that I'm going to use to, collect the data, of course. Like Qualtrics, I will also mention Qualtrics. That's the tool that I'm going to collect the data. Yeah.
Okay, so these are lots of different things that need to be talked about separately. So after your section on participants, I'm kind of writing up stuff as well, so I'll send this to you afterwards, because I've put in some things as we've been talking. But after your section on participants, you then need to write about accessing and recruiting participants, and then you would talk specifically about data collection. Okay. So again, it just makes sure that you're very clearly addressing one thing under one heading. Otherwise, it can be, what you're needing to do is make as clear as possible what you've done and why. So then you would talk about your data collection, and in there you would talk about your measures, as well as then how you've done it.
Okay.
And then your data analyses.
Yes.
And it might be, and again, you'll need to, this is one of the things that you will need to play around with when you're writing, is whether you set out your methods, your research design chapter in a way that actually addresses the philosophical stuff and the rationale for mixed methods and the setting and the participants and the accessing and recruiting, and actually in the participants, in the setting, and then because the participants and the access and recruit will be slightly different for each aspect, so the quantitative and the qualitative, and then you give us the participants, the accessing, the data collection and the analysis for the quantitative, and then you do the same for the qualitative, because that's the flow of the study. And because every time you write about, for instance, participants, you'll have to write about participants for the quantitative aspect and participants for the qualitative aspect. And you might find that actually it's just easier to say, right now, in this whole bit, I'm writing about the quantitative, and I'm going to tell you about participants and access and data collection and analysis. And then I'm going to tell you all about the qualitative, and again, under those same headings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you means that I don't mix the two methods together in just one big section. I just separate the qualitative and quantitative one, in terms of study design, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So that might work more easily. And again, so when you're writing, what we often do, or certainly what I regularly do, and most people I work with do as well, is we'll write something and then we'll read it and go, actually, you know what, that's not as clear as it could be. I need to structure it differently. So it might be that you think, okay, I'm going to write it all together first, and then you go back and you look at it, or you send it to us and we have some discussion, and actually you say, well, I think it would be clearer if I did quantitative then qualitative in that study design bit. Or it might be, that you just decide to make that decision straight off. It's up to you. But the thing is that writing, when we write, there's always then reviewing and restructuring. So it's never fixed in stone from the beginning. Okay. No matter how good our plans are.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, but this is good. This is looking good, and it's good to have this amount of detail. And then chapter
results then.
Yeah.
So first, of course, first the quantitative results, and then the qualitative result come after. Yeah, I'm going to use 3 types of analysis: the univariate statistics, bivariate, and multivariate statistics. The multivariate statistics mainly used to know the correlation, the relationship between the measures.
Yep. And does the multivariate then include sort of a regression analysis to look at how much contribution each of the different variables makes to the kind of the dependent variable?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you would have that, and then you'll have your qualitative results, right? So what is the? It's very difficult to know, really, what the qualitative results will look like. So actually, whilst in your quantitative bit, you can be kind of clear that you will have these findings because you're going to do these kinds of statistics. You have to, I suppose, one of the things, and you know that statistics is not totally my bag, but there also needs to be a rationale for how does the univariate and the bivariate and the multivariate kind of build through, so that I'm assuming they do. So using univariate statistics, what would a univariate statistic be? Give me an example.
Like the mean. The mean of.
All right. So those are descriptive.
Yes,
we
descriptive.
Would call descriptive.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So that's just what I would call descriptive statistics. Maybe it's called differently where in the books that you've got. But yeah. So descriptive statistics, yep, I can do that. They are indeed means and sort of standard deviations and things like that.
Yes.
And then the bivariate, so are those things like, I don't know, like t-tests, novas?
Yes, t-tests like measure versus different genders, like
right, so a chi-square type thing or something like that.
Yes, chi-square. Yeah.
Okay. And then your multivariate would be a sort of a regression analysis.
Yes, will be measures.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously that then logically builds, because you need to have done the chi-squares to then be able to then progress onto your regression.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, see, I do know that much. Okay, I was just a bit baffled by the univariate. I don't tend to think of those, so I would call them correlational statistics. And then, but essentially, you're doing your descriptives, then your chi-squares, and then your
regressions, and then
regressions. Yep. Yeah. Great. Okay, and then the qualitative results. So, what kind of qualitative? What's your qualitative analytic approach going to be?
Qualitative approach, you mean about, I will collect the same data, they fill up the questionnaire. I will talk to them and then collect the data, of course, and then I'll ask them questions, ask them questions about use of social media, social identity, attributional style, and minority stress. But I will not directly ask them the correlations between different measures. I will ask them, what do you feel about use of social media or either LGBT channel? What do you feel about that? And how do you use them? And what do you think about social identity? I will just ask them very abstract questions and then let them to develop their answer on their own.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And it's unlikely that you would ask anything directly about attributional styles, to be honest with you, because it's not the kind of language that people use.
That's also true.
But okay, so what I'm getting is that actually, though, what you've done here is kind of put the lenses in that we would talk about. I mean, I suspect you'll do thematic analysis.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you're doing thematic analysis, obviously then you have to have something that helps you think about how the individual responses and the things that people are talking about fit together to make a bigger explanation and a bigger story about what's going on, because that's what we're doing with qualitative analysis, exactly like what we're doing really with quantitative analysis as well.
Yes.
So you would be doing that thematic analysis, and you will have asked those particular questions. What I guess what I'm getting at is that you might not be reporting the findings under those headings. So it may well be that you are that you find different things, but that doesn't really matter for just now. That's useful to kind of have a sense of these are the things that you will be thinking about when you are analysing, partly because they're the things that you're thinking about throughout the whole project. So they provide you with your theoretical lenses for understanding what is going on. So that's good.
Actually, I haven't done the qualitative research before by thematic analysis. Yeah, I will try to do that, of course. But I think, I mentioned 4 different measures here on, of the qualitative results. Under the qualitative results, I mentioned 4 parts here. And I will first think about some questions about one section, like use of social media. I will decide some question to ask first, Yeah.
So we will go through all of that before you do your interviews, okay? So we will talk about, and you can go away and you can read about doing interviewing, and actually, I think it's an on-campus thing. All right, anyway, we can cover all of that. I was about to say I think there's a course on doing interviewing, but I think it's on campus, so that's not helpful. But we can talk about doing interviewing and how you will do it, and you can practice. We can maybe give you a practice interview with one of us. You can practice interview one of us, but to give you a sense of what it's like. But then the thematic analysis also we will support you with. Okay, so you will, by the time you get there, you will feel like you have more understanding of how qualitative works, and it needs a bit of what we were talking about last time, which is about that patience and about not panicking when we don't immediately see things, and we just need to allow it to kind of happen, and we engage with it, and then we start to make sense of it. So it's not as immediate as the quantitative is very immediate, isn't it? You've got these numbers, you put them in your database, you use your statistical package, and you make the findings basically. So yeah, we will support you with all of that. That's fine. Very few PhD students have ever done qualitative analysis before they get there in their PhD, so I really wouldn't worry about it.
Oh, really? Yeah, people have been telling me that the thematic analysis looks like a bit like quantitative research, but I just don't understand why. No,
it doesn't.
Really?
I don't know who's been telling you that, but it definitely doesn't.
Okay.
Really don't. Yeah, we will. we'll send you off to, maybe these are things you can go away and read about just now, actually. You could maybe go and, I think you need to go and read about the kind of the critical realist stuff, but also maybe go and read more about thematic analysis and how you're going to do it. There's lots of, so Braun and Clark, who I'm not really very keen on, but they are a good place to start. And their later work. So Braun and Clark, I'll put them in here as well.
Okay.
And they do stuff about thematic analysis. And they're quite commonly used, and they're quite clearly explain it. And so they're a good place to start, and then you can look, and it's good to go and just read that material and get a sense of the qualitative. Okay, and what the quality, and maybe read more about some qualitative approaches and what qualitative research does. Go and read some qualitative research, read some research that's done about LGB experiences, just of anything really, to be honest with you, that uses a qualitative approach to really get a sense of qualitative research. Okay. We're going to have to finish in a little minute because we're at it up at 12 o'clock. But actually, you know, this has been a really useful exercise, I think. I hope it's been useful for you.
Yes.
Yep. The discussion will then bring your quantitative and your qualitative together. Now, I think perhaps in that discussion. So I think you'll have a discussion chapter and a conclusion chapter, okay? But in your discussion chapter, I think what you'll do is bring the findings of the qualitative and the quantitative together to say, okay, so what is this bigger thing that the qualitative and quantitative tell us? And then you'll take them and engage with your conceptual model and think, okay, so actually now I know this, now I've got these findings, how does that change maybe some of the parts of the conceptual model? Does it make some of my arrows, instead of being solid, do they become dotted lines because maybe they're not as strong? Or what are the changes, or what is the impact on that on my conceptual model? And that's kind of then becomes your contribution to knowledge, which is what you'll talk about in your conclusion. Okay? So the discussion, it's very difficult to know exactly what that will look like till you've found it, but you will bring basically the quantitative and qualitative results together.
Okay.
And I think
there is no conclusion, so do I have to add conclusion and then discussion?
You have a conclusion chapter.
Okay.
Okay. So yes, you would have a conclusion, and that again, it would be relatively short, you know, but it would bring the conclusion together. You talk then about the contribution to knowledge that your thesis is making. You talk about your limitations, you talk about the implications for, I don't know, for policy, for healthcare practice, for whatever it might be. You talk about future research. You and you kind of just draw it all to a conclusion. So yeah, a conclusion chapter is a really useful chapter. It just draws it all together.
Okay.
That's very good though, Oscar.
Yes.
Really good. Well done.
Actually,
Does it?
yes, inside chapter 5 discussion, you see that A to E, um, those are the conclusions of each measure and the research question as well. So those are the answer to conclusion already inside discussion part, you see. So,
Well, no, because the conclusion is the conclusion to the thesis, so you need to then address contributions to knowledge directly.
okay.
The limitations, the implications for research, etc. So it's just a very short chapter.
Okay.
But it definitely is. I prefer when I'm examining research PhD theses. If you don't put in a conclusion chapter, it never quite feels finished.
Okay.
And your discussion will be quite big. So, in a paper, you wouldn't finish a paper with a discussion. You always go to a conclusion. And equally in a thesis, you should do the same thing. Okay? But, it feels like we've had a good discussion about all of the things that will be in this thesis.
Yes.
Yeah.
The structure, the main structure, yeah.
Yeah. And that it's quite helpful that we've got this kind of almost like this agreement that this is what it will look like. So I think now really it's just about going away, and I would suggest doing some reading round about the qualitative aspect of the project, because I think that's something you really need to strengthen for your own kind of, for you to feel confident, really. Yeah, so I think that would be really important for you to strengthen that. And then is it just then about going and doing the reading, taking what you've got already, and then doing further reading round about it and developing it into each of the sections, and just take each little section, as a piece. So decide on a chapter, and then, it might be you decide to do your literature, which is really, that would be where I would start. You've done a lot of that anyway, and think about that. And so, yes, so just starting the writing bit now while you're waiting for ethics is really good. And then there will be a bit of doing, getting your access to your participants, etc., and, getting participants. But actually also there will be quite a bit of waiting whilst you're doing that as well. So you can, again, just keep on reading, keep on writing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So, do you know how long does I need to wait for the ethics approved?
I don't know. I would imagine it will come back quite quickly. I don't think there was much, really. There wasn't much to. Was there only a couple of things, wasn't there? So yes. I think, to be fair, I think it should be fine. I would have hoped in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So maybe you'll have it before the Christmas break, and then you can start collecting data in early January, and that will be good.
Okay. And yeah, it's very productive meeting today, I think.
It's felt very productive, actually. It feels like you've got. We're kind of setting up a sense of what you're doing now is the thesis and where it all's fitting together. And I think you've made a really good job of thinking through the contents. So yeah, I'll send you my notes just now.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And we have another meeting in for, I think, 3 weeks. So that's good.
The next one will be mid-December, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
so you take care.
Yeah, thanks for your help. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
See you soon, Oscar.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.